That's coming up at 6 right here on K-Squid. We have many voices, one station. We are broadcasting around the Monterey Bay and around the world, apparently. We have listeners in Hungary, in Canada, and Atlanta, Georgia. So if you're listening, we're with you. We're right here for you. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and I'm really pleased to welcome to the microphone Mark Silberstein, who was the director, or is the outgoing director of the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, the organization that has stewarded this very precious piece of land in our midst here on the Central Coast. It's smack in the middle of the Monterey Bay. It's one of the most productive wetlands in the world. I'm sure that Mark will share the scientific amount of superlatives we're allowed to use. But welcome and thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Nice to be here. And, I would just start by letting listeners know that I had a little vocal cord procedure, so this hoarseness is not contagious. It's just annoying.
Well, we will not be annoyed because you got here, and I know as a singer and speaker on the radio that it would be really hard for me to suddenly not be able to talk. So you're going to do your best, and listeners, this is worth it, so stick with us here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And congratulations on a huge career that's spanned decades. You got here in the 60s.
Well, I did, and I've been working at Elkhorn Slough for the last 43 years. And let me tell you, it's been a very satisfying journey.
I can imagine. So, the director of a foundation for the Elkhorn Slough, what does that entail? What kinds of things were under your watch that you stewarded through all those years?
Yeah, the position evolved over those years. So I would not hire myself today to do the work that the foundation is doing. But when I began, soon out of graduate school, really the focus was educating the community about this place, about this resource that was theirs, that really was not very well known. And as a graduate student at Moss Landing Marine Labs, I did a lot of work in Elkhorn Slough. It was kind of our backyard. We cut our research teeth there. And it just is a fascinating place. And in those early days, my job was to kind of pull the curtain back on what Elkhorn Slough was about, why it was important, and how we might work together to protect it and take care of it. Things evolve. As the role of an executive director, you wear a lot of different hats. And so building a board, we have a stupendous board of directors, a growing staff. Today, the Elkhorn Slough Foundation employs 40 people. And we have land assets. We, I think, are the largest landowner in the Elkhorn Slough watershed with 4,200 acres of land protected by the organization. And so, things evolve, and certainly fundraising becomes one of the jobs. And so that's all woven into the fabric of these little community organizations.
Well, little but mighty. I guess it would be important, I think, to tell people what the Elkhorn Slough is and why it's so important. One statistic I heard, and I hope it's not still true, but it probably is that 90% of California's wetlands were drained and, turned into agriculture land or put houses on. And wetlands are like the nurseries for things like salmon and other creatures that we eat, not to mention those that we just admire for their beauty. And how big is the Elkhorn Slough? It's a pretty large wetland, right?
Yes.
Right in the middle of the Monterey Bay.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's smack dab in the geographic center of the Monterey Bay shoreline. And you are right, correct, that a lot of the wetlands, both along the coast and inland in California, have been converted to other uses. And so the kind of production that happens, the natural production that happens in these wetlands and coastal areas is lost. So in Elkhorn Slough, I think the footprint of tidal influenced areas in the slough is maybe 2,500 acres. And it's embedded in a drainage basin, a watershed of maybe 45,000 acres or so. And Elkhorn Slough itself has undergone a lot of changes with diking and draining and conversion. And one of the exciting things happening there now is restoring some of those lost wetlands. But what's interesting about Elkhorn Slough, it is, as you pointed out, right in the center, I prefer to call it the heart of the bay. In a short span, because the mouth of Elkhorn Slough is confluent with the head of the huge Monterey Submarine Canyon, in a short span you can go from rocky, chaparral-covered ridgetops to the deep sea, in the span of maybe 6 miles or so.
And people do in kayaks. I know the Kayak Connection is right there. You can rent
it's
kayaks.
True. People can explore the slough and paddle over the canyon. So I think the proximity of all those kinds of habitats, from chaparral to woodlands to grasslands to marshes to dunes to the deep sea, means that there's an extraordinary diversity of life. There's a huge biological diversity that's concentrated in that central part of the bay, embedded around the slough and the Monterey Bay, and that's something important. So, in addition to the aesthetic aspects, which I think you and I share, there's economic aspects. So, one of the students from UC Santa Cruz studied flatfish in Elkhorn Slough. The larval fish spend their lives in Elkhorn Slough, migrate out into the bay, where they become part of the commercial catch. And the student found that a disproportionate number of fish caught in Monterey Bay spent their larval lives in Elkhorn Slough, far out of proportion to the size of the slough.
Right, so it really is a fish nursery.
It is a nursery for fish and lots of other species.
And the Crab Town, there's this little place where you can kayak by there, and there's all these little crabs in little cubby holes. And it's
true.
Wild.
It's always fascinating, I agree.
Yeah, there's so many cool things. My experience of Elkhorn Slough was having a sea otter, a rather aggressive one, trying to board our kayak. That was a little unusual.
Those little devils. I think they were part of the fundraising team.
That's right. Yeah, you could get your picture, a selfie with a sea otter trying to board your boat for $2,500. Well, it's a beautiful place, and it's pretty unusual in the sense that there aren't very many of them like it. I drove to San Diego, and there were some unusual wetlands I didn't know about, having not been there for years.
No, it's true. I mean, once you get south of Point Conception, there's a series of these little, I used to think of it as a string of pearls. There's a Newport Bay, Carpinteria Marsh, all the way down. There's just this beautiful string. A lot of them have been seriously impacted, and there's huge efforts going on by those local communities to restore and manage those little gems. Elkhorn Slough is unique in that it had not undergone the kind of development that some of the Southern California coastal wetlands had.
But it did have some really big challenges, like people were farming strawberries with pesticides right on the edge of the slough. The Moss Landing power plant was giving off toxic metals that were settling in there. There was old DDT deep in the mud there from previous agricultural use. There's a lot going on that's really damaging still, even though there's not a lot of buildings around there.
Yeah.
And how do you even begin to clean that up? And we'll talk about the battery fire in a minute, because I know people are curious about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that was one of the kind of foundational challenges of doing conservation in a working landscape. And so for some of the things the Elkhorn Slough Foundation embraced, for example, working with agricultural folks, with farmers. And ultimately, the Elkhorn Slough Foundation purchased land and is maintaining 5 farms. We've converted them to agricultural, to organic production, working with farmers. We lease it out to growers. There's an operating cattle ranch that the foundation owns that was a gift from the Porter family. So we manage a cattle ranch, we manage 4 organic farms. And I think that building bridges to those communities is really important. And there's a 2-way education. So how do you tackle in what seem to be intractable problems. And you don't do it unilaterally.
You don't just say, "Get off my land."
Yeah, and
there was a junkyard there too. Is that still there?
There was a big junkyard. There's still a wrecking yard. And so I think that's the thing that always fascinated me. Standing at the overlook at the Elkhorn Slough Reserve, which I hope everybody knows about. You can go online and find a map and a trail map there. But I stand on the overlook and I look out over the marshes of Elkhorn Slough. There's a rail line. The Union Pacific Railroad goes through the eastern side of the slough. There are the two gigantic smokestacks, no longer functional, that were part of the power plant. There's a fishing port. There's farms. There's residential development. Just about every land use you can imagine in the coastal zone, except perhaps, say, for logging, is happening right there. And so, from my vantage point, as time went on, I realized that is what you need to figure out how to solve these problems. So I've had the great privilege of visiting absolutely pristine estuaries and wetlands in Alaska, in South America, many other parts of the world. Elkhorn Slough is not pristine, but if you want to learn how to do conservation, how to balance these kinds of competing and sometimes conflicting interests, it's a perfect laboratory. The size of the watershed is small enough that you can get your arms around it and really kind of work with the community. So I think one of the pleasures that I've experienced over these several decades is seeing a lot of positive improvements in Elkhorn Slough. I've seen people really put their shoulder to the wheel of trying to balance this equation. We can talk about the battery fire, which was certainly one of the awful paragraphs in this chapter.
Yeah, let's do that, but I want to reintroduce you in case
Sure.
people just joined me. This is Talk of the Bay on K-Squid, and I'm speaking with Mark Silberstein. He is the outgoing director of the Elkhorn Slough Foundation after 43 years.
That's right.
That's a long
time.
career.
Flies when you're having fun, Rachel.
Yeah, well, you must have loved it because you hung in there and
I did.
Made some big difference. Before we get to the battery fire, though, I wanted to go back to, how do you get rid of, heavy metals and, DDT out of mud, which is essentially what's there, right?
Yeah.
Would you not disturb it and just hope it, gets buried, or what do you do?
I think that, I'm not sure we have time for the extended version of the story, but I was at Moss Landing Marine Labs when the State Department of Fish and Game had the Mussel Watch program. The program would sample little mussels attached to the rocks up and down the coast. These little animals filter tremendous amounts of water, and they'll concentrate certain chemicals. So the fish and game biologists could use them as little test animals. They put them out in the environment.
Did they consent? I don't know.
Did
they consent?
I'm not going to talk about the trajectory of that, but these were non-consenting mussels. But the biologists could sample them, and then because they were sampled up and down the coast, they could see where there were hot spots for certain kind of chemicals. And the lower Salinas River, literally right behind Moss Landing Marine Labs, where the old river channel flowed, consistently showed the highest levels of DDT in any of the sampling sites. I watched this. It was uncanny because I knew the director of the Mussel Watch program. And every year he'd get the results. He'd do an op-ed in the Monterey Herald, and he said, "We've measured the highest levels of DDT anywhere in the state." And this was in the 80s. DDT was banned in 1972. The next day, in the paper, there would be an op-ed from the ag commissioner saying, "We haven't used this for 10 years. These are the best farmers in the world. This is specious data." And I watched it. It was uncanny every year. What we wound up doing, two things. Number one, DDT is not soluble in water. It's a polar compound. And so it attaches to charged particles like silt and clay. The solution is to keep it on the hills. And so if you're managing erosion in the hills, the DDT will be locked in the soil. It won't mobilize. It won't go into the waterway and cause problems, which it does. What we wound up doing was inviting the ag commissioner onto the board of the Elkhorn Slough Foundation. And over the course of the last 25 years or so, we've worked with farmers doing outreach, controlling management on farms. I had lunch today, this is an aside, with Daniel Mountjoy,
Aw.
who sends his greetings to you.
Thank you.
But Daniel worked with the National NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, and so we worked together for probably a decade, working with farmers on keeping the soil and all the attendant chemicals on the hills. I think that as sedimentation increases, some of those old chemicals get covered, but they don't break down. They're there for a long time.
So-called forever chemicals, and we're still fighting to get those banned.
So I think the solution is to kind of stabilize both the hills and the sediments, and then you can minimize the disruption caused by those old chemicals.
So when you heard there was a fire at Elkhorn Slough's battery plant there, what was your first thought?
I was actually working then. I was working in my little office, which overlooks the slough, and I was sitting with one of my colleagues. The curtains were drawn, and I got a phone call from one of our board members, and he said, "What's going on with the fire?" I said, "What do you mean?" I opened the curtains, and we saw these flames engulfing the plant with this cloud of smoke. So we walked down to the overlook. We kind of assessed it, and then we decided that we're getting out of here. So it was, I was terrifying. Even from a distance of a couple of miles away, the flames were reaching 200 or 300 feet high, because those stacks are 500 feet high. So they're like a measuring stick.
Right.
And so the flames were, easily a couple of 100 feet high. And over the course of the next several days, the county evacuated the area around Elkhorn Slough. We're very concerned. The county EPA, all folks came out. Our county supervisor in North Montgomery County, Glenn Church, was right up front, and he was out there really concerned, talking to people. The early data reports from the agencies indicated that there were no levels that they measured that crossed the threshold of concern, which was a little puzzling, because we saw the smoke bellowing out of this thing. And not by chance, but by dint of the fact that the National Estuarine Research Reserve and the Elkhorn Slough Foundation have been working on measuring water quality and gathering data in Elkhorn Slough for 40 plus years. There was a baseline, and one of the scientists from Moss Landing Marine Labs, Ivana Aiello, had worked with our research team on measuring levels of metals in one of the restoration sites around the slough. So we had data from before the fire. He went out after the fire, and using a handheld X-ray diffraction unit, measured levels that were 2 to 3 orders of magnitude higher than before the fire. And the metals that he identified were the metals associated with the cathode side of these batteries. So had there not been that kind of investment in long-term research and monitoring, this would have been missed, because the agencies were using other kinds of monitoring techniques that were not so specific, and the sampling was dispersed. And so that was like one of the really critical things, and I think the triumphs of having a presence in a long-term data set.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was so much concern about public health as well. People did not have enough information to know whether they were in the path of something bad. They had to make their own decisions. You can argue, a long time about how that was handled.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are very concerned about the wildlife
Yes.
at Elkhorn Slough. So is there now a long-term monitoring of the health, and of the sea otters, of the fish? Are they, okay to eat? There's a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think, to your first point, this was like a serious stress test. Like we're depending on being able to store renewable energy. And so there was multiple tragedies about this failure, and not the least of which was that this diminished people's confidence in this kind of technology. And there's a whole list of critiques and reasons why this may have happened, the way that the storage system was built. There's going to be a lot of work done to untangle that. But part of the stress test was that our infrastructure, agency infrastructure, was inadequate, both to measure potential impacts and effects, and two, to communicate clearly. And so we learned a lot from this, and I think we all have a responsibility. The battery owners, the agencies, those of us who live in the community, to say, this was the largest storage battery on Earth. And so we have a responsibility to understand what the impact was, not just to the little battery, but to the environment, as you said. There is now an effort led by a team of scientists, including the research coordinator at the Elkhorn Slough Reserve, Dr. Wasson, Dr. Ayala from Moss Landing, staff from the aquarium. Kerstin Wasson has been working with the Amamutsan Stewardship, the Amamutsan Tribe Stewardship Corps, and they are out there sampling the biota. Ivano measured a thin layer of these metals on the surface of the soil. And after some months, tides and rain diminished those concentrations, but they don't disappear. So the team is sequentially monitoring fish and wildlife to see if these metals wind up getting incorporated into food webs of the slough. It's a really important question.
Yeah, and we probably won't know it too quickly, right?
It's going to take some time.
Is there a monitoring program for human beings as well?
You know, the county gathered health data. Some of my personal friends and acquaintances got very sick.
Oh, I'm
They
sorry.
really suffered.
Yeah.
And there's still some lingering effects. And it's challenging because there doesn't seem to be a lot of data on exposure and health effects. And so, you know, there's lawsuits flying all around and people are concerned. But, you know, I think that's part of what we need to learn. So there has been some effort to monitor. The county did gather data from people who reported symptoms post-fire. And so I think, you know, I think what I come back to the obligation we have. You can't undo what happened, but the obligation to say, we need to understand this. We need to make sure that we understand these systems so this doesn't happen again.
And there was a proposal, or maybe still is, to put a new one in Watsonville.
That's
so
right.
That's why we need to figure out how to make sure
That's right.
it's safe enough, if it can be made safe enough. And like you said, the bigger environmental problem, climate change, has got to be addressed, and that's what we have right now. Maybe we'll invent something later that's safer, but we don't have many alternatives to battery storage because of the fact that you can't store wind and solar any other way so far.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it was quite an episode. And I think, you know, for me, it circles back to, you know, having places like Elkhorn Slough that are, you know, taking care of these precious resources, but also hubs of research, of understanding, of community engagement, so that we can measure how catastrophic events like this, hopefully that'll never happen again.
Yeah.
And
We wouldn't want it to be a lab for polluting things.
But things like changing climate. I mean, the irony is that the area that was sampled, that had before and after samples after the fire, is a marshland that's being restored to withstand 100 years of sea level rise. And so it's just this interesting circle. And, you know, here's where we humans are on this trajectory. We got a lot of work to do, Rachel.
Yes, we do, and we need federal help, we need state help, and we need local help to do it all, because, you know, we need money for science research, and that's my plug for that. We only have a minute or so. So what's next for you? Are you staying around as an advisor, or what?
I am. So I'm I would love to come back with an interview and introduce my successor,
That would be great.
Taylor Honrath. He and I have worked together for 7 years. He's been our deputy director, and I'm really enthusiastic and excited about him taking over the helm. For me, I'm going to follow you because I have a closet full of stringed instruments that I want to start learning how to play better. And so I'm going to maybe take lessons from you.
Or I saw an old picture of you playing the banjo, which is
I used to love playing the 5-string banjo. It's been a while.
Okay, well, you're on. Mark Silberstein, it's been a great pleasure, and congratulations on 43 years at the helm of the Elkhorn Slough Foundation.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.